Tired of walking across the world to retrieve your items just because you died? Well, today, I'm going to show you how to make dying a thing of the past with unkillable, and I mean literally unkillable, builds that work for early, mid, and late game. For this build, we're going to need to grab ourselves a couple of Gemini rings. You could also use 2 rings of endless life in their place instead, but I find that the Gemini rings aren't all that hard to obtain early on, and you'll have a better percentage chance at triggering the effect by 2%. So to start, let's head on up to the dilapidated tower up in Moth's Grove, beginning at the first ancient spire that we unlock in the Springlands. It's just a short glide northeast from the top of the spire down. Once we reach the tower in the Shroud, we'll make our way up until we find the Banshee. When defeated, this specific Banshee drops the Gemini ring, along with the Gem of Burning. For now, we'll be covering the ring in detail, but be sure to pick up the gem too, as we'll need that for later in the video. Now that we have the ring, let's take a look at what it does. It's important to note that the Life Leech chance is additive, so stacking 2 of these rings together will give you a 14% chance at triggering lifesteal. So what we'll need to do next is wait for the Banshee to respawn and repeat the process once more. I think it takes about 30 or so real life minutes for enemies to respawn in the world. But Dooter, this is just a basic Life Leech build. You'd be correct in that observation. However, while the rings alone are a nice battle healing band-aid, here's where it gets spicy. The secret ingredient that's really going to grant you some nice beginner necromancy happens to be none other than the Counterstrike node in the skill tree. This node, paired with the rings, gives you a chance to reflect that damage, combined with a chance to heal off that damage. Now here's how that makes you immortal. So the way that healing works in Enshrouded in this particular case is that if you drop to 0 health but are healed shortly after, you lose all your buffs as if you died normally, but you still gain the HP you were healed for. You even get to keep a hold of everything that's in your inventory. This means that you're capable of self-resurrecting after dying. Here it is in action. This does have its limitations though, as any follow-up attacks will just deal the finishing blow unless you somehow get really lucky. With it being a 20% chance to reflect damage, and the rings having a 14% chance to leech health off that 20% damage, that makes the overall probability of you resurrecting a 2.8% chance if I'm doing the math right. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. Or just leave a comment, like, and subscribe. I'm just starting out and planning on making more content for Enshrouded and games like this soon, so any support is super appreciated. Despite these limitations, the skill and ring investment is a fairly cheap price to pay in the early game, with the node you need and the node it relies on only costing you 3 total skill points, along with both your ring slots, which, in early game, while the utility of having other rings instead is certainly debatable, Life Leech is just pretty darn useful to have for that much more survivability. However, this next method I'm about to show you is much more reliable in terms of its self-reviving capabilities. This method is fairly simple, albeit RNG dependent based on your loot drops. You have to find the type of weapon you like that carries the Health Leech enhancement, and pair it with any gem capable of doing damage over time. Here's a list of a few weapons that carry Health Leech. And some gems that are capable of triggering damage over time. The way this one works is that, with the Health Leech weapon enhancement being a constant source of healing as long as you do damage, instead of a percentage chance like the rings, and by applying damage over time to the enemies right before you take a fatal blow, you will trigger self-healing for every tick of damage you do. This means that all you have to do is time your attack to resurrect yourself. Here's a few examples of that. In terms of least to most reliable, with every gem fully upgraded, and character skills maxed, the gem of Storm's Eye gets an honorable mention here. While it technically can do damage over time, the timing is pretty tight, as the lightning bolt just zips through enemies quickly, even when the enemy spawn amount is set to max. The gem of Meteoric Impact comes in last for reliability, due to its trigger condition being very situational. You'll need to travel a certain distance before the buff kicks in, and I find that double jumping doesn't quite give you enough height to trigger it. Next up, we have the gems of Bleeding and Toxic Betrayal. Triggering these is much more straightforward than the last. The gem of Bleeding requires you to land a crit on the target, after which it will apply the bleeding status for 6.5 seconds with the gem unupgraded. Early game, crits can be hard to come by, but later in the skill tree, you'll be able to unlock nodes that will help increase your critical chance. This only applies to cutting damage though, so any other damage type won't get this benefit. The gem of Toxic Betrayal is simple and consistent, as all you need to do is backstab the enemies to apply the status. Your weapons don't need to fulfill any damage type prerequisites to apply the status, unlike the Bleeding gem, so that makes this one a very flexible choice. Finally, we have the gems of Corruption and Burning. These two are extremely simple and easy to trigger, as all you need to do is hit the enemy to apply the status. The gem of Corruption has a very forgiving damage window, as it does damage to enemies you mark 3 seconds after your last hit on them. Like the gem of Toxic Betrayal, this one has no special damage type needing fulfilled to enable it. However, Shroud enemies are completely immune to the Shroud status it applies, so you won't be getting any heals off that particular enemy type. As far as I'm aware, there's no enemy that's completely immune to fire damage, let alone a whole faction that's immune, only resistant, so that makes the gem of Burning come out on top for most reliable in keeping you up. However, like the gem of Bleeding, this one requires you to have a particular damage type on your weapon to function first, which in this case is fire damage. Unupgraded, the gem of Burning also has a shorter window of damage than the time it takes for its cooldown to reset, so this one works better the higher you can upgrade it. All in all, every gem listed, aside from Meteoric Impact, are pretty consistent and are solid choices when it comes to making you harder to kill. You wanna know what will really make you unkillable though? Retaliation is a weapon enhancement that dishes a percentage of melee damage back to enemies. That, paired with Health Leech, means you are virtually undownable to melee attacks. I say virtually because on rare occasions, a follow-up enemy attack can sometimes deal the finishing blow, despite how it should be dealt back, and heal you immediately. For most cases, it does seem to follow that logic, and is the most consistent way to never go down in the game, at least to melee. Here's a list of weapons with the winning combination. The final cherry on top is slotting in any of the better 4 of the 5 gems we went over, covering you from any stray ranged or magic attacks that could potentially take you out. Pretty absurd, right? Now, this begs the question, is this some sort of accidental bug, or an intentional mechanic? Since self-resurrection is not explicitly mentioned anywhere in the game, and as the game is still in early access at the time of making this video, I'd venture to say that it's likely unintentional that your character can practically ignore the worst effect of dying, which is being dead. However, while it might not be in Keen's, the developer's, best interest to leave it as it is, I think that something like this in its earlier stages could be worked into something of an intentional gameplay mechanic. If they did eventually decide to remove this interaction, I could see its spirit somewhat retained if Keen gave us a self-revive node in the skill tree, perhaps balancing it out with a cooldown window, as opposed to near complete immortality as it is. That being said, the developers have just announced a tentative release date of 1.0, aiming for autumn of 2026, in which they have mentioned combat improvements for greater tactical depth, so perhaps they may address what might be a happy little accident that is self-reviving at that point. If you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Like I mentioned earlier, this is one of my first few videos, so you staying to watch is phenomenal and super appreciated. I want to know what you think about self-resurrection being in the game. Is it too broken and should it be patched out? Or do you think Keen should consider keeping it as a feature going forward? Let me know in the comments below and consider subscribing for more.